Did The Walking Dead universe turn in one of its greatest stories in 2012, but one that never hit television? I'm Mark from Digital Dissection. I'd likely die first in the zombie apocalypse. And today we're taking a critical look at Telltale Games' The Walking Dead Season 1. Before we cover ourselves in Walker Guts, be sure to subscribe and click the bell to be notified of new videos and more pop culture content on this channel, where we're always dissecting. April 24th, 2012 marked the beginning of a new journey for Telltale Games. The studio itself was founded by former LucasArts developers Ken Bruner, Dan Connors, and Troy Melander, after their previous employer exited the action-adventure or point-and-click genre. Now, if you watched our Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis video in this series, the previous era of LucasArts productions were built on what was called the Scum engine, a gaming engine which had a very distinct look and feel, and Telltale Games would end up developing their own tool, literally called the Telltale tool. We're guessing the thesaurus must have been out of office that day. After the company's founding in 2004, however, Telltale Games achieved moderate success, adapting IPs like Homestar Runner, Sam & Max, and original stories within Back to the Future and Jurassic Park. Early on, it was pretty clear that Telltale knew how to tell a story, as their Back to the Future adaptation told a pretty interesting series of events that took place about 20 years before the films did. By the time 2012 rolled around, however, Telltale established itself as a producer of games that were entertaining, but admittedly, they weren't always pretty, nor were they technical achievements. The Walking Dead, however, joining forces with Telltale Games, marked an iconic partnership for a few reasons. For one, The Walking Dead's TV adaptation was being viewed on a historic number of televisions. And two, Telltale had already been trying to adapt the action-adventure genre into a dynamic zombie survival game experience, and tried to do so, but failed to convince Valve to use Left 4 Dead as a potential universe setting. Fortunately for Telltale Games, Walking Dead creator Robert Kirkman fully bought into the idea, favorably accepting the concept that games will give us good or bad options typically, but for the setting of a zombie apocalypse, there might be no great options at all. Now, at this point in my life, I was an avid reader of The Walking Dead. I watched the TV show, and when Season 1 of the video game was announced, I was ready to see exactly how the survival series would fit into the Telltale Games playbook. Having Robert Kirkman be so involved with its narrative and immersion was a great sign. And immediately, something just felt different the first time I started up this game. Telltale's art style throughout the years always had a somewhat cartoonish feel. You could tell its engine had limitations, but this was admittedly part of their game's charm. After playing about 6 of their titles, I expected something similar. But right away, The Walking Dead's art direction was noticeably cel-shaded, and early interviews pointed towards it being in line with the comic series universe. So spiritually, with this decision, it felt like a living parallel to the comics I was already reading, but its menus and tutorials made something very clear. My decisions would influence the game and its environment. Tonally, The Walking Dead is an already depressing universe to work within, but in video game form, this feeling didn't take long to establish, as players assume the role of convicted murderer and former college professor Lee Everett. The game opens up as he's being transported to prison, the very same that Rick Grimes and his group would later inhabit. Everett, however, while flawed, feels like a reasonable person, and his crime of passion occurred after his wife cheats on him with a Georgia state senator. This secret isn't known by many throughout The Walking Dead's first season, but is one example of how details shape critical aspects of this experience. The makeup of The Walking Dead truly does require you to begin investing in what kind of character you want Lee Everett to be. Shortly after the game's opening events, he's introduced to Clementine, a young girl who is separated from her parents as they're on vacation out of town when the apocalypse first begins. With Lee as a surrogate parent, this survival story suddenly becomes less about the fate of your character, but how your decisions impact the growing number of people around you. As we talked about immersion earlier, this game initially places you at the start of the same apocalypse that fans of the TV show and comics have watched unfold, but introduces a few characters like Herschel Green and Glenn Rhee as ways to remind you of its source material. Sometimes cameos like this can feel forced, but in the world of The Walking Dead, it allows you to see a different side of characters we otherwise have no prequels for. At its core, however, the 2012 game relies on an original cast of characters. And while there's no good or bad parties to technically align with, choosing sides amongst inevitable disagreements and friction amongst the survivors shapes the first season's 5 episodes. With each passing decision, to Kirkman's point, you often can't feel fully satisfied with each one you make. Like choosing between saving Carly or Doug, 2 valuable members of your group. Which one did you end up saving? Let us know in the comments. 11 years later, however, it's not just a solid technical experience that made this title a Game of the Year winner. The true core strength is the emotional weight that Lee and Clementine's journey builds towards, as their bond is a focal point that's hard to ignore. On the backs of award-winning performances by Dave Fennoy and Melissa Hutchison, Lee and Clementine initially begin as reluctant partners based on the extenuating circumstances they're dropped into. However, over time, the two gradually begin to trust each other. But depending on the decisions the player makes as Lee, this can at times take steps forward and backwards. Ultimately, however, like many parent-child relationships, Lee and Clementine's time together can't last forever. And by the first season's finale, we're introduced to one of the most emotional moments in video game history, which we won't entirely ruin for you here. But it's a culmination of many well-executed decisions, both conceptually and functionally, that make this video game surpass certain elements of even The Walking Dead's TV show counterpart. In the end, Telltale's first season of The Walking Dead was a pop culture event that made you want to feel part of something bigger. We've talked multiple times about decisions the player has to make, but it doesn't stop there. You also got to see how others reacted in the same scenario. Not only that, but there are even more possibilities in terms of who chose to follow you in your journey. And even after multiple playthroughs, I kept trying to experiment to see which outcomes I didn't get to experience yet. Now, some might debate and take issue with the fact that even the most creative of multiple choice gaming outcomes inevitably end up with a limited scope by their conclusion. But every game has to pick where their roads end. And 2012's The Walking Dead delivers far more possibilities to get to before you arrive at that point. Now, it's true that The Walking Dead's Telltale journey didn't end after just one season, but the collective experience of the 2012 effort reinforced and expanded the popularity of the franchise and just how big an emotional gut punch was possible within the Walking Dead universe. We may not be done fully commenting on this series, but that will have to be a story for another time. However, as always, thank you for watching this retrospective on Telltale Games' The Walking Dead. Stay tuned for more retrospectives on this channel, and if you want to see more, we're always open to suggestions. And until next time, pop culture nerds, keep on dissecting.